After 50 long years of scrimping and saving, my husband and I had finally scraped enough together to buy a house, a real home to call our very own. You'd think from then on we'd just be holding hands, enjoying the quiet life. But life, as it so often does, has its own surprises. And that surprise came on a peaceful Tuesday morning when my daughter-in-law called with what sounded less like a request and more like a royal decree. "Mom, I'm bringing the whole family and my folks over for the weekend this Friday. It's only about 20 people. Have the place ready, okay?" She didn't ask if we were okay with it, just decided on her own to bring 20 people and shatter the very peace my husband and I had worked our whole lives to build. And this is my story. You'll want to stick around to hear how it all unfolded. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 72 years old. These hands of mine have grown accustomed to the weight of grandchildren, of grocery bags, and of 1,000 quiet sacrifices that nobody ever needed to know about. But that morning, for the first time in more years than I can count, all my hands could feel was the warmth of a coffee mug and the lightness of a dream finally made real. We were at Serenity Pines Lodge, our new log home nestled by the shores of Lake Lure, right at the foot of North Carolina's majestic Blue Ridge Mountains. Arthur, my husband, came up with the name. He said it wasn't just a name, but a promise of peace. And truly, the very air here seemed to be woven from it. The smell of damp pine needles after a dewy night, the scent of old cedar, and the faint, clean smell of new paint all mingled together, filling my chest in the best kind of way. Arthur, at 75, still has the sturdy presence of an old oak tree. He was carefully unpacking one of the last cardboard boxes, one labeled Memories. He moved slowly, but there was a sureness in every motion. His back was a little stooped, his silver hair was thin in the morning sunlight streaming through the window, but his eyes sparkled with a boyish joy I hadn't seen in a long, long time. "Eleanor, come look at this," he called, his voice a low, warm rumble. He gently lifted out a small end table, its top just big enough for a cup of tea and a book. It was made of walnut, a deep, rich brown, its corners worn smooth by the years. The glossy finish it once had now bore tiny scratches, like fine wrinkles marking the passage of time. Arthur had built that table with his own 2 hands 30 years ago, in a cramped garage on a Sunday afternoon. It had moved with us 3 times, served as the place where our son David did his homework, and held the vase of poinsettias every Christmas. I walked over, took a soft cloth, and began to gently wipe it down. The dust from the move vanished, leaving the warm wood beneath my touch. Every grain seemed to tell a story. I could feel the love and patience Arthur had poured into it. "It finally has a worthy home, honey," I said softly, a lump forming in my throat. Arthur came and stood beside me, wrapping a gentle arm around my shoulders. He looked out the window, where the lake glittered as if someone had sprinkled 1,000,000 tiny diamonds across its surface. "Just like us, my love," he replied. We smiled at each other. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a smile that held a lifetime. 50 years of elbow grease, of sleepless nights worrying about the kids, of simple meals so we could save every last penny. All of those sacrifices had now crystallized into this place, a sanctuary, a place that was ours, a place where we could finally grow old in peace. In that moment, I truly believed that nothing could ever break this perfect peace. The serenity was shattered by a sound that had become foreign in our new home, the ringing of the landline telephone. The old beige phone, a relic Arthur had insisted on bringing, jangled with a dry, harsh ring that felt out of place in the symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves. I picked it up, the smile still on my face, thinking it might be a new neighbor calling to say hello. "Hello, Eleanor speaking." "Eleanor, I've got great news." The voice on the other end was the chipper, sickeringly sweet tone of my daughter-in-law, Jessica. My smile faltered. Great news from Jessica usually wasn't great news for us. "Hello, Jessica. What's on your mind?" "The whole family and my parents are driving up to Serenity Pines this Friday for the weekend. Everyone is so excited." She said it all in one breathless rush, leaving no room for me to process. It'll only be about 20 of us. Make sure you get the master bedroom ready for Mom and Dad. It has the best view, right? 20 people. The number hit my ears like a thunderclap. Our home had 3 bedrooms. I felt my chest tighten. Oh, and you'll need to clear out some of that old furniture in the living room so the kids have space to play, she continued, her tone as casual as if she were giving orders to a housekeeper. I'll text you a list of groceries to pick up. My whole body went rigid. I glanced at Arthur's little table, at the boxes still waiting to be unpacked, at this house that was still finding its shape as our home. The peace I felt just moments ago evaporated like mist. Jess, but I tried to interject, my voice pathetically weak. We just moved in. Nothing is set up yet. Oh, don't you worry, Mom. We'll be there on time. Jessica cut me off without a second thought, the impatience clear in her voice. See you then. Click. The line went dead. All that was left was a stunning, insulting silence. I held the receiver to my ear for a long moment, as if I couldn't believe the conversation had ended that way. Not a single question, not one. Would that be all right? Just a string of commands wrapped in a sugary coating. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, staring out at the lake, but seeing nothing. Jessica's words echoed in my head, picking at old scars I had tried so hard to bury. Arthur came to me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. His touch was warm and steady, an anchor in the storm brewing inside me. And that touch opened the floodgates of memory. A series of sharp, painful images flashed through my mind like a movie on fast forward. 10 years ago, we were at a fancy Italian restaurant celebrating David's promotion. Jessica's father, a successful man with a gleaming Rolex on his wrist, pulled out an envelope and handed it to David. A belated wedding gift to help you kids buy a house, he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. Jessica beamed, kissing her father's cheek. In the middle of all the cheer, I caught David's eye. My son looked at me, and for a split second, I saw guilt, helplessness, as if he knew he'd just sold a piece of his freedom. 5 years ago, Christmas Eve at David and Jessica's house. The house was filled with laughter and twinkling lights. I had spent a month knitting Jessica a beautiful cashmere scarf in a shade of seafoam green. Every stitch was a prayer for her warmth, for her family's happiness. When I gave it to her, she smiled a perfect, polite smile. "Thanks, Mom. It's cute," she said, then casually tossed it on the arm of a chair. Minutes later, she squealed with delight when her own mother gave her a designer handbag. For the rest of the night, my scarf lay forgotten, a lonely piece of wool in a sea of glossy wrapping paper. Last year, a summer barbecue. I was sitting on the lawn with my granddaughter, Lucy. She was completely captivated by a story I was telling about a rabbit who talked to the moon, her little eyes wide with wonder. It was a precious moment of connection, an invisible thread between generations. Suddenly, Jessica walked over. She didn't say a word to me. She just scooped Lucy up. "Come on, sweetie, it's iPad time," she said to the girl, then shot me a look. Grandma's old-fashioned stories will make them fall behind. Her words, though spoken softly, felt like a slap. She hadn't just taken my grandchild from my arms. She had judged and dismissed my entire world. Those memories, one after another, piled up, pressing down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I came back to the present. Arthur's hand was still on my shoulder. I took a deep breath, but the fresh mountain air couldn't seem to reach my constricted lungs. I looked out at the lake. Its surface was still calm, but I knew an undercurrent was rising from the depths of my soul. When I turned to look at Arthur, he saw it in my eyes. It wasn't just hurt or sadness anymore. The sadness had crystallized, hardened into something else, something sharp and cold. It was the resolve of tempered steel. I had spent my entire life keeping the peace, being patient, backing down. I had swallowed condescending remarks and overlooked disrespectful actions, all because I loved my son and because I feared the awful silence that would follow if I ever spoke up. But today, in this house, the house built from our sacrifices, I realized that the silence I feared most was my own. My silence had made me invisible. "Arthur," I said, and my voice was no longer trembling. It was low and clear. "Get me the notebook and a pen." Arthur looked deep into my eyes. He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. He had seen it all, had been by my side through all those years. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod, a nod of complete understanding and support. "It's time," he said. And I knew our fight, the fight to reclaim our dignity and our peace, had just begun. Not with shouting, but with purposeful silence and a carefully written plan. We didn't have to wait long. At 10 o'clock sharp on Friday morning, the first sound wasn't birdsong, but the crunch of gravel under heavy tires. Arthur and I were in the kitchen, but we both froze, as if hearing a silent alarm. Peeking through the window, I saw not one, but 4 gleaming black SUVs rolling up our driveway in a line, like a funeral procession arriving to bury our peace. The door of the lead vehicle swung open, and Jessica emerged. She wore a pair of sunglasses so large they hid half her face. Her hair was in a perfect top knot, and her outfit probably cost more than all the furniture in my house combined. She strode toward the house like a queen descending from a carriage, not even glancing at Arthur and me standing at the door, and walked right in as if she owned the place. "God, it still smells like old wood in here," were the first words out of her mouth, her voice grating as she took off her glasses. "We need some air freshener. David, tell your parents to move that bookcase. I need a spot for the sound system." The other car doors opened. A cacophony of loud chatter, screaming children, and slamming doors erupted the forest's tranquility to shreds. Jessica's family, an army of nearly 20 people, began to swarm our yard, carrying coolers, oversized bags, and an overwhelming atmosphere of invasion. David, my son, got out last. He avoided my eyes. He looked tired and strained, but he said nothing. He just followed silently at his wife's heels, a pale shadow in the story of his own life. Jessica's father, a large man with a face flushed from self-satisfaction, clapped Arthur hard on the back. "Nice work, Arthur. This place is decent." He then turned to his own brother, Travis. "See, told you my investment wouldn't be a total loss." Jessica was now circling the living room, her eyes scanning everything with a critical gaze. "This coffee table has to go," she declared, pointing to an old table. "Travis, bring your speakers in here." Then she walked right up to Arthur's little walnut table, the one we had so lovingly polished just a few mornings ago. She dropped her designer handbag on it with a thud and then went to drag the table into a corner to make room for another large bag. "This thing is ancient. Let's just put it in storage, Mom," she said dismissively without even looking at me. And that was it. That was the moment. Something inside Arthur, a patience that had been worn down for a decade, finally snapped. He moved forward faster than I'd seen him in years. His calloused hand came down flat on the table, stopping Jessica's action cold. His voice wasn't loud, but it was as low and hard as 2 stones grinding together. "Don't touch it." The noisy house fell instantly, unnaturally silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned in our direction. Even the children seemed to sense the tension and stopped running. For a moment, the only sounds were the ticking of our old grandfather clock and the frantic pounding of my own heart. David rushed over, his face pale. "Dad, it's just a table." I stepped forward to stand beside Arthur. I looked my son directly in the eye, and this time I didn't let the pain make my voice tremble. My voice was ice. "David, it is not just a table. It's a piece of furniture that has been with your father and me for 30 years. Just like this house, which represents 50 years of our lives scraped together. It is not some old thing to be tossed into storage. I turned to Jessica, my gaze unflinching. Jessica, this is our home. We are happy to have you as guests, but you do not have the right to change a single thing. The silence was broken by a laugh, a sharp, mocking laugh from Jessica. She turned to her own parents, who were standing there looking annoyed. "Did you hear that? I don't believe this," she said, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. She spun back to me, her pretty face twisted with rage. "Let me remind you of something, Eleanor. If it wasn't for my family's money, you two would still be in that cramped little bungalow in the suburbs. Us coming here is an honor for you. We are gracing this place with our presence. You have no right to stop us." Her father nodded in agreement, crossing his arms over his chest. "The girl's right, Eleanor. We're all family here. Let's not be difficult. No need to get worked up." "Sit down," I said. My voice wasn't a request. It was a command. And surprisingly, they all listened. Perhaps the sudden change in me had caught them off guard. They reluctantly settled onto the sofas and armchairs, the air stretched as tight as a violin string. Arthur, my quiet husband, the man who always let me handle things, was the one who acted. He walked to a small cabinet and pulled out an old ledger. Its cover was frayed, the corners curled. He walked back to the coffee table and set it down. The sound it made was small, but it echoed in the room. "This was our first savings account from 1975, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He opened it, revealing pages of neatly handwritten figures. Every single penny. Money from Eleanor's tutoring after her teaching job. Money from me fixing cars on the weekends. Every single penny. He looked up, directly at Jessica's father. "Your money helped David start his business. We don't deny that, and we are grateful. But it did not buy 50 years of our lives. And it certainly did not buy this house. This place was built with 50 years of our sweat and tears, not your investment." He paused, then finished in a voice that allowed for no argument. "I'm asking you and your family to leave." The air turned to ice. I knew it was my turn. I looked directly at Jessica, who was gaping, stunned. "I have been silent for too many years," I began, my voice now a vessel for all my pent-up grief. "I let you dismiss my gifts, belittle my words, and make me invisible in my own family. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was wrong. You cannot build peace on a foundation of disrespect." "Oh, please stop the theatrics," Jessica shrieked, her fake sweetness gone, replaced by raw spite. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. We came here to bring some life to this dreary place. You should be grateful." "Grateful," I shot back, my eyes like daggers. "Grateful that I worked my entire life just to be treated like an unpaid servant in my own home? Your parents gave you money, yes, but money does not give you the right to buy another person's dignity." Then I did the hardest thing. I turned to David, my son, my own flesh and blood. He was sitting there, shrunken, his head bowed. "And you, David, my son." My voice finally broke with pain. "You stood there. You saw everything. You saw your wife disrespect me. You saw her cast aside my gift. You heard it all. And you chose silence. Your silence hurt me more than any of her words ever could. You were not strong enough to be a fair husband, and you failed at being a son." My words were a bomb detonating in the center of the room. Jessica, humiliated and furious, leaped to her feet. She started toward me, her mouth open to spew more venom. But David grabbed her arm. "Jess, that's enough. We're leaving," he whispered urgently. It was a mistake. Crack!
A sharp, brutal sound echoed through the room. Jessica had wrenched her arm free and slapped David across the face with all her might, right in front of 20 people. She screamed, her voice dripping with acid, every word a lash not just against David, but against me.
You coward! You're taking their side? Do you forget who gave you your job? Who bought the car you drive, the suit you wear? Without me and my family, you are nothing. A complete failure. How dare you defy me? That slap? Those words? They broke something inside my son. David slowly lifted his head. He looked at his wife, and for the first time in years, I didn't see fear in his eyes. I saw disgust. He spoke, his voice steady and clear. I would rather be a failure than a man who was ungrateful to his own parents. He walked over and stood with me and Arthur. David's defiance was something my in-laws had not anticipated. Jessica's father shot to his feet, his face crimson with rage. He pointed a finger at David. "What did you say, boy? Do you want to be out on the street?" He and a few of the other men in the family started to advance, their threatening postures filling the small living room, creating a suffocating pressure. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was past the point of no return. While all eyes were on the standoff between the men, I quietly walked to the landline phone. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed the numbers. My voice cut through the tense silence, clear and firm. "Hello? Henderson County Sheriff's Office? This is Eleanor Vance at Serenity Pines Lodge on Lake Lure. I'd like to report a home invasion. There are about 20 people in my house who are refusing to leave." I hung up the phone, and I waited. The storm had reached its peak. Now we would see what was left standing when it passed. After I hung up, the room fell into a strange silence. Not the silence of peace, but of anticipation. It was like the air before a thunderstorm, thick and heavy. Jessica's father stared at me, his eyes narrowed, trying to decide if I was bluffing. Jessica just looked at me with pure loathing, as if I were something that had crawled out from under a rock. We didn't have to wait long. About 15 minutes later, the faint sound of a distant siren grew steadily louder. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the pine trees, painting eerie streaks across the living room walls. A Henderson County patrol car crunched up the gravel driveway and stopped. 2 deputies got out. They weren't aggressive young bucks, but 2 tired-looking middle-aged men who had probably seen too many family dramas on a weekend. The older one, with a graying mustache and a bit of a belly, walked to the door. Arthur opened it. The officer gave a polite nod. "Afternoon, sir. We received a call." "Come in, officer," Arthur said, his voice solid. Jessica's father immediately tried to take control. "Officer, this is all just a family misunderstanding. I'm Richard Miller, president of Miller Construction." The older deputy held up a hand, a gentle but firm gesture that commanded authority. "Sir, with all due respect, we don't care who you are. We just care who legally owns this property." He turned to Arthur. "Whose home is this?" "It belongs to me and my wife, Eleanor Vance," Arthur stated plainly. After the necessary procedures and a clear account of the situation, the deputy nodded. He turned back to the crowd of people scattered uncomfortably around my living room. His voice was still polite, but it held no room for negotiation. "Folks, this is private property. The homeowners have asked you to leave. I'm going to need you all to cooperate and gather your things." It was a fatal blow to the Miller family's pride. There were no more arguments, no more threats, just the cold, hard fact of the law. Their arrogant bubble burst. The exodus began. It happened in a seething, humiliated silence. The harsh zip of suitcases, the grating scrape of coolers being dragged across the wood floor. The laughter was gone, replaced by angry whispers and hateful glares thrown in our direction. They grabbed their belongings in a chaotic rush that was a stark contrast to the orderly invasion Jessica had tried to command upon arrival. Jessica was the last to leave. She had to walk past me to get to the door. She stopped, her face inches from mine. Her eyes burned with a cold fire. She hissed through clenched teeth. "You will regret this," she said. "My presence was an honor you were too stupid to appreciate." I said nothing. I just looked at her. And my silence, I think, enraged her more than any words could have. As David's father-in-law passed him, he leaned in close. Though he spoke quietly, I heard every venomous word. "Just you wait until Monday morning at the office." And then they were gone. The procession of luxury SUVs snaked back down the driveway, this time carrying defeat and humiliation, leaving deep ruts in the gravel like fresh scars. The convoy disappeared behind the trees. The sound of their engines faded, then vanished. Silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. It was heavy, hollow, and full of things unsaid. The yard looked desolate. It was just the three of us, standing in the aftermath of a battle. David hadn't left with them. My son was still standing there, in the middle of the living room, on the rug my mother had woven. He stood perfectly still, a statue of regret. He looked down at his own hands, then slowly looked up at us. Arthur's face was etched with exhaustion. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one afternoon. I knew I had too. The adrenaline that had held me up through the storm was draining away, leaving a painful emptiness. And then my son broke. He didn't sob. The tears just streamed silently down his face. He walked forward, and before Arthur or I could react, he fell to his knees before us, right there on the cedar floorboards. A grown man, on his knees before his parents. "Mom, Dad," his voice was a choked, broken whisper. "I'm so sorry." He bowed his head, his broad shoulders shaking. "I've been a terrible son. I let money and fear blind me. I saw everything Jessica did. I heard everything she said all these years, and I did nothing. I was a coward." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw a depth of pain in them he had hidden for so long. "I'm sorry I left you to fight this alone." In that moment, all the anger I felt for him melted away. All that was left was the love a mother has for her lost son. I went to him and placed my hands on his shoulders. "Get up, David." He shook his head. "I don't deserve to." I said, "Get up." My voice was gentle but firm. He slowly rose to his feet, a full head taller than me, but in that moment he looked so small. I didn't hug him. It wasn't time for that yet. Instead, I looked directly into his tear-filled eyes. I didn't offer empty platitudes like, "It's okay," or "It'll all be all right," because it wasn't. Things were not all right. Something had been broken that could not be perfectly mended. "It's going to take time, David," I said, "to heal, to rebuild trust. But today you made the right choice." He nodded, unable to speak. Arthur stepped forward. He said nothing. He simply placed his large, rough hand on David's other shoulder. It was a gentle squeeze, but it held a father's forgiveness, acceptance, and a love that no words could ever express. Later that afternoon, the three of us went out to the porch and sat on the wooden chairs, looking out at the lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky and the water in soft shades of orange and purple. The cool evening air was beginning to drift through the pines. We sat in silence, but it was a completely different silence. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was the silence of survivors after a storm, watching the sky clear together. Arthur's hand never left David's shoulder. A family had been torn apart today. A marriage had likely ended. A career might be in jeopardy. We had lost the illusion of a big, happy family. But as I looked at the husband who stood by me for half a century, and at the son who had finally found his way back to himself, I knew we had found something far more precious. We had found our real family again. Small, imperfect, but rebuilt on a new foundation. Not on tolerance,
not on compromising for a false peace, but on truth, self-respect, and dignity. And the peace I felt in that moment was deeper and more real than any peace I had ever known.